Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going exploring some fascinating cybersecurity review questions, especially encryption and access control. They really get you thinking, don't
Yeah,
they?
they do. And using these review questions as a guide, we can unpack some really complex terms in a way that makes sense, so you can actually use this knowledge.
Absolutely, and I'm ready to jump right in. So one question focuses on key wrapping, which honestly sounds a little like, well, gift wrapping for encryption keys. Is it that straightforward?
Well, the name is pretty literal. It's all about guarding your encryption keys. Think of them as the master keys to all your data. If those keys get compromised, well, that's bad news. Key wrapping adds another layer by encrypting those keys with yet another key.
Oh, I see. So like hiding the key to your safe inside a second, even more secure safe.
That's a great analogy, because if someone manages to swipe your encrypted data, they could then go after those encryption keys themselves. Key wrapping makes that a whole lot harder.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Another question is about what encryption actually protects. I used to think it was only about keeping data secret while it's like traveling over the internet, like an email.
You're right, that's a big part of it, but encryption actually protects data in three different states: at rest, in transit, and in use.
Wait, in use. So how can data be like actively used and still be encrypted at the same time?
That's where it gets a little trickier. Data can definitely be encrypted when it's stored or being sent somewhere, but when it's being processed, it often needs to be decrypted, and that's when it's the most vulnerable.
Oh, so it's like the data has a bodyguard when it's traveling or locked up safe, but that bodyguard has to like step aside when the data is being used.
Perfect analogy. And that's why strong security at every stage is so crucial, not just during transmission or storage.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk key rotation. One question compares it to changing your passwords regularly.
That's a great comparison. Think about it. If someone steals your password, the more time they have with it, the more damage they can do, right? The same goes for encryption keys.
So rotating those keys limits the impact if something gets compromised because the keys are only good for like a limited time.
Precisely. Simple, but really effective for reducing risk. It's like minimizing the window of opportunity for attackers.
Okay, last encryption fundamental before we jump into other topics.
Yeah.
This question about the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Honestly, those terms always feel a little intimidating to me.
They're not as bad as they sound once you break them down. Think of symmetric encryption like using the same key to lock and unlock a door. Both people have an identical copy.
So it's like sharing a secret code with a friend so you can send messages back and forth.
Yes. Now, imagine you want to send a secure message to someone you've never met before. You can't really share a secret key beforehand, right? That's where asymmetric encryption comes in handy. It uses two keys, one public, one private.
Okay, so the public key is used to encrypt the message, and then the receiver uses their private key to decrypt it.
Exactly. Think of it like a mailbox. Anyone can drop a letter in the slot that's the public key, but only the person with the mailbox key, the private key, can open it up and get the message.
That makes sense. So asymmetric encryption is super important for things like online shopping, where you need to send sensitive info securely, even though you haven't, met the seller in person to swap keys.
Exactly. It's one of the core technologies that makes secure communication and online transactions possible.
Wow, encryption is incredible. All right, feeling pretty good about those encryption basics. Ready to move on to some real-world security threats and how we can actually deal with them.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Let's start with something you might not expect: dumpster diving. One question actually flags this as a real security threat.
Dumpster diving. Really? How can, like, rummaging through trash be a security risk?
You'd be amazed what people throw away. Old documents, bank statements, even handwritten notes, they could all have sensitive info that someone could piece together.
Yeah, the question even mentions that shredded documents might not be enough to stop a really dedicated attacker.
Exactly. It shows how security threats can pop up in the most unexpected places, and that even something as simple as throwing something away can have consequences.
So, big takeaway, be super careful about what we toss out and make sure to properly destroy anything sensitive. Okay, what about digital code signing? One question mentions it as a way to make sure software is legit and hasn't been messed with.
That's a huge one, especially now when we're constantly downloading software and apps. Think of digital code signing like a seal of authenticity. It uses cryptography to guarantee that the software is actually from the source it claims to be from.
So like a guarantee that the software hasn't been modified or had some nasty malware slipped in after it was made?
Exactly. It builds trust and makes sure you're getting what you expect. That's crucial in the digital world.
Okay, last one before we move on. security monitoring, and the tools used to spot and respond to potential attacks. What are some of the key technologies involved there?
One of the most important is the intrusion detection system, or IDS for short. It's always watching network traffic for anything suspicious, looking for patterns that could mean an attack is happening.
So like digital watchdog, always on guard for anything unusual.
Exactly. And it's not just about detecting threats. These systems can trigger automatic responses to contain a potential threat, giving security teams valuable time to investigate and take further action.
This is all really fascinating. I'm starting to see how all these pieces work together to make a safer digital environment.
Absolutely. It's a complex and constantly changing landscape, but understanding these fundamentals is key for navigating the world of cybersecurity.
All right, ready to tackle some more of these cybersecurity questions. Let's talk VPNs. I use one all the time, but to be honest, I'm not totally clear on how they work. One question that caught my eye was how not all VPNs actually encrypt data locally. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's a good one. And it points to a pretty common misunderstanding about VPNs. The term VPN, it's a bit like saying car. There are different types, each with its own features and security levels. Some VPN protocols, like IPsec, encrypt your data locally before sending it through the VPN tunnel. But others, like L2TP, might rely on encryption being handled somewhere else, which could leave your data vulnerable on your local network.
So it's like assuming all cars have airbags just because they're cars. You really need to, read the fine print before you trust your safety to them.
Exactly. It's super important to understand the specific VPN protocol your provider uses and its security features before you trust it with your data.
Okay, good reminder to do my homework. Another question positions VPNs as a key tool for keeping things confidential, especially when you're using public Wi-Fi. Why is that so important?
Well, think about all the times you've connected to Wi-Fi at a coffee shop or the airport. When you use a public network like that, you're basically broadcasting your data to anyone else on that network who might be listening in.
Okay, that's a little creepy. So a VPN basically acts as a shield, protecting my data from prying eyes.
Exactly. A VPN creates this secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the VPN server, so it's much harder for anyone on the public network to intercept or snoop on your data.
That definitely makes me feel better about using public Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
One more VPN question that I found interesting was about IPsec tunnel mode. It's not just about encryption, it's also about hiding your internal network addresses.
That's right. IPsec tunnel mode adds another layer of security by masking your real IP address, so it looks like your traffic is coming from the VPN server. Kind of like wearing a disguise to blend in with a crowd.
So it's like I'm using a secret back channel to talk to the websites I visit, and no one on the public network can tell where I'm really located.
Precisely. It gives you a level of anonymity that can be really important for protecting your privacy and security.
Okay, I'm feeling way more knowledgeable about VPNs now. Let's switch gears to access control. We've got a bunch of questions here about biometrics, passwords, all those good things.
Yeah, access control, it's all about figuring out who has access to what. It's a huge part of cybersecurity, and it can get pretty complicated.
One question that jumped out at me was about how reliable different biometric methods are. Which ones are considered the most secure?
That's a good question, and there isn't always an easy answer. Each biometric method has its own strengths and weaknesses. Fingerprint scanning, it's convenient and used everywhere, but it can be tricked by, really high-quality fakes.
Wait, so someone could actually create a fake fingerprint to fool a scanner?
It is possible, though the technology is always getting better. Iris scanning is usually seen as more secure because the patterns in your iris are so complex and hard to copy.
What about facial recognition? That seems to be getting more and more popular these days.
Yeah, facial recognition has come a long way, but it also brings up concerns about privacy and potential misuse.
So there's no perfect solution when it comes to biometrics. It really depends on the situation.
Right. Choosing the best biometric method depends on a lot of things. The level of security you need, cost, the specific application, all of that.
Makes sense. Another question emphasizes how important it is to use layered access control, like combining strong passwords with other security measures. Why is that layering so crucial?
Imagine trying to break into a house that has multiple locks on the door. Way harder than picking just one lock, right? Same principle in cybersecurity.
So if one layer fails, the others are there as backup protection.
Exactly. It's about having a defense in depth that makes it super tough for attackers to get in.
That makes sense. Let's talk a little more about biometrics. One question that I thought was interesting points out that biometrics are mainly about authentication, not just identification. What's the difference?
You're right. That's an important distinction. Identification is about figuring out who someone is, like recognizing their face in a crowd. Authentication is about verifying that someone is who they claim to be.
So identification is like saying, hey, I think that's John over there. But authentication is like John proving it's really him by showing his driver's license.
Perfect analogy. Biometrics are mostly used for authentication, like using your fingerprint to unlock your phone or your face to get into a secure building.
Okay, that clears things up. One question that seems really relevant to bigger organizations is about distributed management and access control. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, as organizations grow and get more complex, it's not always practical to have one central authority controlling all access to systems and data. Distributed management lets organizations delegate those responsibilities to different departments or individuals.
So instead of having one IT person managing everything, you could have different people managing access based on their roles and responsibilities.
Exactly. It's more flexible and scalable, so organizations can adjust their access control policies as their needs change.
Okay, before we get to some of the more advanced security concepts, let's touch on a question that highlights the potential downsides of single sign-on, or SSO.
Right. SSO is a popular feature because it lets users access multiple applications and services with just one set of credentials. Super convenient, but it also introduces some security risks.
Because if those credentials get compromised, someone could get access to everything.
That's the worry. If SSO isn't implemented properly or without strong security measures, it can create a single point of failure that could have really bad consequences.
So it's like having one master key that unlocks every door in your house. Convenient, but risky if it falls into the wrong hands.
Exactly. Organizations have to think carefully about the security implications of SSO and implement strong authentication, like multi-factor authentication, to reduce the risks.
Okay, last question on access control before we move on. It's about biometric sensors and how they actually work.
Biometric sensors are those devices that capture and analyze your unique biometric data, things like your fingerprint or iris pattern. They turn those biological characteristics into digital data that can be used for authentication.
So it's like taking a picture of your fingerprint and comparing it to a stored image to verify your identity.
That's a simplified way to think about it. The actual process is pretty complex, but basically, biometric sensors compare your biometric data to a reference template to see if it's a match.
That's really cool. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground on access control. Ready to dive into some more advanced security concepts. Okay, I think we're ready for the grand finale. Let's wrap things up with some more advanced security concepts. We've got questions on digital signatures, data classification, and even how to spot those sneaky malware threats that are out there.
Sounds good to me. Let's start off with digital signatures. One question really emphasizes that they're not just about keeping things secret, but also about confirming who sent something and making sure it hasn't been messed with.
So it's less about like hiding the message and more about knowing for sure who sent it and that it's still in its original form.
Exactly. Think of it like a real signature on a contract, but in digital form. It's a way to verify that a document is authentic and hasn't been altered.
So if I get a document with a digital signature, I can be pretty confident it's really from the person or organization it says it's from, and that nobody's changed anything along the way.
That's right. They use cryptography to make this unique fingerprint that's linked to the document and the person who signed it. So any changes, and boom, the signature is invalid.
That's pretty amazing, especially when you think about how much communication and business happens online these days. Okay, another question dives into the role of management in developing encryption systems. It actually says that bad management practices are one of the biggest threats to encryption security. Why is that?
Well, you could have the most secure encryption algorithms out there, but if they're not set up and managed correctly, they're basically useless.
So it's not just about the tech itself, but how people use and control it.
Exactly. Things like wiki management, bad security policies, or even employees not being trained properly, those can all create weaknesses that undermine the whole system.
It makes sense when you put it that way. It's like having a super high-tech vault, but leaving the key out in the open. Okay, what about data classification? One question highlights how important it is for figuring out how to handle and protect different types of data. Why is classifying data so important?
Right. Not all data is equal. Some data is really sensitive stuff like customer financial information or trade secrets, while other data is less critical. Data classification helps organizations determine the right level of protection for each type of data.
So it's about like setting priorities and making sure the most sensitive data gets the strongest protection.
Exactly. It's about using resources wisely and having clear procedures for handling and accessing data based on how sensitive it is.
Okay, circling back to encryption for a sec. One question points out that encryption isn't just about confidentiality, but also about ensuring data integrity. How does that work?
Encryption algorithms can basically create a digital fingerprint of data. And if that data is changed in any way, the fingerprint changes too. By checking the fingerprint before and after it's sent or stored, you can verify that nobody's tampered with it.
So encryption not only keeps the data secret, but also acts as a tamper-proof seal to make sure nothing's been altered.
Exactly. It's really powerful for maintaining trust and making sure digital systems are reliable.
Okay, let's tackle a term that might sound a bit intimidating. Minutiae.
Yeah.
One of the questions defines it in the context of biometrics.
Ah, yes. Minutia, it refers to all those tiny unique details in your fingerprints or iris patterns. Those details are what make your biometric data truly yours and what biometric systems use to verify your identity.
So it's like those tiny ridges and swirls in your fingerprint that set it apart from everyone else's.
Precisely. Biometric sensors capture and analyze these minutiae to create a digital representation, which is then compared to a stored template for authentication.
Makes sense. All right, let's switch gears to the internet. One question introduces transport layer security, or TLS, that's a mouthful. It says it's the best way to secure web sessions. What's so special about TLS?
TLS is like a super important protocol that secures communications over networks like the internet. It's what puts that S in HTTPS, showing you've got a secure connection.
So whenever I see that little padlock icon in my browser, that means TLS is protecting my connection with the website, right?
Yep, that's right. It encrypts the data going back and forth between your browser and the website's server, so no one can eavesdrop or mess with it.
So without TLS, someone could potentially see my online banking transactions or steal my login info.
Exactly. It's absolutely crucial for protecting sensitive information online.
Okay, let's revisit those terms, symmetric and asymmetric encryption for a moment. One question asks about how they're typically used and why asymmetric is often the preferred choice for, like, transportation security.
Remember that mailbox analogy? Asymmetric encryption is perfect when you need to securely exchange information with someone you've never met. You don't need to share a secret key in advance.
So for online shopping, I don't need to physically meet the merchant to get a secret encryption key before I can send them my credit card information securely.
You got it. It allows for secure communication even when parties haven't established a shared secret beforehand.
Wow, that's incredibly important for making online transactions safe. Okay, for our last malware spotlight, let's talk about rootkits. One question describes them as sneaky programs that can give hackers remote control of a computer. How do they manage to pull that off?
Rootkits are designed to bury themselves deep within a computer's operating system. They can change system files and processes, making them very, very difficult to detect and remove.
So it's like a virus that digs its way into the heart of your computer and takes over.
That's a good way to think about it. They can give attackers special access to your computer, letting them steal data, install more malware, or even use your computer as part of a botnet.
That's scary stuff. What can people do to protect themselves from these rootkits?
Solid antivirus software is a must, and it's crucial to keep your operating system and all your software up to date. Being careful about the websites you visit and the files you download also helps a lot.
Okay, last question before we wrap up. It's all about digital certificates, those little digital badges that verify computers and devices online.
Yeah, digital certificates are like digital passports for websites and other online entities. They're issued by these trusted organizations called certificate authorities, and their job is to verify the identity of the website or device.
So when I see a website with a digital certificate, I can be reasonably sure I'm talking to the real website, not some imposter.
That's the idea. They help prevent attackers from pretending to be legitimate websites or intercepting sensitive information. They're a big part of building trust and security online.
Wow, I can't believe how much we covered today. From basic encryption all the way to digital certificates, this deep dive has been incredibly informative.
It's been great diving into these questions with you. Hopefully everyone listening has a much better grasp on cybersecurity and all the challenges in this constantly evolving world.
Absolutely. A big thanks to our expert for breaking down all this complex stuff. And to our listeners, stay curious, stay informed, and above all, stay safe out there in the digital world.